things like escalated to the point where, you know, my man got too familiar, and I ended up having to whip his ass, man, you know, because, you know, he would step across the line.
There's a man who got knocked out cold by Prince, the pop icon in eyeliner and heels on a basketball court, and lived to tell the story on national television. There's a man who beat down a music legend not once but twice for disrespecting his brother's house. And there's a man who, according to the people who knew him best, was quietly one of the most dangerous martial artists in the entertainment industry. That man is Charlie Murphy. You know him from Chappelle's show. You know the Rick James sketches. You know, I'm Rick James, bitch. But here's the question. How much of what you saw on screen was actually a joke, and how much of it really happened, word for word, exactly the way he told it? By the end of this video, you're going to know the answer. And I promise you, it's stranger than anything a writer could have made up. Stick around, because story number 3 involves a teenage fighter, a VHS tape, and a room full of comedians who had no idea what they were about to watch. The Brother in the Shadows. Before we get into the wild stuff, let's set the scene. Because to understand why Charlie Murphy's stories hit as hard as they did, you have to understand the position he was in. Charlie wasn't some guy who stumbled into fame. He earned his place the hard way. Before Hollywood, before the cameras, before anybody outside of New York knew his name, Charlie served his country in the United States Navy. Think about that for a second. While most future comedians were doing open mics in dive bars, Charlie was in uniform. When he got out, he didn't walk straight into a spotlight. He worked as a bouncer, then a bodyguard. The kind of jobs where you learn to read a room fast, and where you learn that talk is cheap unless you can back it up. That matters, because it explains a lot about what's coming later in this video. Now here's the part that a lot of people don't think about. Charlie's younger brother was Eddie Murphy, and by the time Charlie was finding his footing in Los Angeles, Eddie wasn't just famous, he was one of the biggest entertainers on the planet. Saturday Night Live, Beverly Hills Cop, Coming to America. The kind of fame where you can't walk into a club without the entire room turning to look. So imagine being Charlie in that moment. You're the older brother. You served your country. You've been a bodyguard, someone other people relied on for protection. And now you're stepping into rooms where every single person is looking past you, waiting for your little brother to walk in. That's a hard position to be in. And it led to one of the most humbling moments of Charlie's early Hollywood life. A story he'd tell decades later, and one that still makes audiences howl. Here's what happened. Early on, Eddie offered Charlie a jacket to wear out to the club. A flashy piece, the kind of thing a showman wears when the whole room already knows who he is. Charlie put it on, feeling good, feeling sharp. They walked into the club together and immediately heard people shouting Eddie's name. But then came the moment that stuck with Charlie forever. Someone in the crowd spotted him next to his famous brother, in that jacket, and instead of recognition, all Charlie got was confusion. People had no idea who he was. Some even mistook the outfit for something else entirely. He said it made him look like an entertainer of a very different kind. Now, ask yourself, how many people do you know who could turn a moment of public embarrassment like that into one of their signature bits, decades later, and have a room erupt in laughter every single time? That's a skill. That's Charlie Murphy. But that jacket story was nothing compared to what was coming, because Charlie Murphy was about to become the unofficial narrator of one of the strangest true stories in music history, and it involves a member of music royalty who most people would never expect to be an elite athlete. The night Prince humiliated everyone. If you've seen Chappelle's show, you already know where this is going. But what you might not know is just how many people, completely independent of each other, confirmed that this story is 100% true. Let's rewind. Charlie Murphy was hanging out with Prince. Yes, that Prince, along with some friends. Somewhere in that hangout, in his usual understated way, Prince made an offer that nobody in the room expected. He suggested a game of basketball. Now picture it. Charlie and his crew are dressed for a night out. Club clothes, nice shoes, not exactly athletic gear. Meanwhile, here's Prince, standing there in an outfit like something out of one of his own music videos, calmly suggesting a pickup game like it was the most normal thing in the world. Charlie thought it was a joke. Why wouldn't he? This is a 5-foot-something musician, dressed for the stage, casually challenging a group of grown men to basketball in the middle of the night. Nobody in that room was worried. Nobody thought twice about the outcome. They should have, because what happened next became the stuff of legend. Prince and his teammate, a friend everyone called Mickey Free, squared off against Charlie's crew, and within minutes, it was clear something was very, very wrong for the other team. Prince wasn't playing around. He was moving like he'd trained for this. Crossovers, step backs, shots that barely touched the rim on their way in. The team that showed up in club clothes got dismantled by a team still dressed like they'd walked off a music video set, earning them the nickname the Blouses. And they didn't just win, they dominated. Here's the part that really sells it though. This isn't just Charlie's word. When people who knew both men were asked directly if the story was true, they didn't hesitate. His brother Eddie backed it up completely, confirming the outfits, confirming the shirts against blouses line, confirming the loss, even Samuel the 50th. Jackson has told his own version. He asked Prince directly, at a basketball game years later, whether the story was real, and Prince didn't just confirm it. He added a detail that made it even better. He'd beaten them wearing dress shoes. Let that sink in for a second. Prince didn't need sneakers to embarrass a group of grown men on a basketball court. He just needed the ball. So here's a question for you. If you'd been standing on that court that night, absolutely certain you were about to win, at what point do you think you would have realized you were in trouble? Because according to everyone who was actually there, by the time they figured it out, it was already too late. Now, if you think that's the wildest story involving Charlie Murphy and a music icon, you have not heard what happened with Rick James. And trust me, this one gets physical. The night things went too far with Rick James. Everybody knows the sketch. "I'm Rick James, bitch," the couch line, the ring that left a mark. It's one of the most quoted moments in the history of sketch comedy. But here's the thing that made it so unforgettable. None of it was invented. Every single beat of that sketch was pulled directly from real life. Let's talk about how it actually started. Charlie and Rick James ran in the same circles for a while, hanging out, going to clubs together, building what seemed like a genuine friendship. But according to Charlie, that friendship had a problem. Rick had a habit of pushing boundaries with the people around him, testing limits that most people wouldn't dare test. And eventually, that habit caught up with him. The two of them were out at a club one night. Charlie describes walking into the VIP section and suddenly hearing his name shouted across the room in Rick's unmistakable voice. What followed, according to Charlie, was a physical altercation, one that ended with a very specific and very memorable souvenir. A ring, worn to commemorate one of Rick's own songs, left an actual imprint that stayed visible on him for about a week afterward. Now here's where it gets even more intense. Charlie says he knew exactly which hotel Rick was staying at that night, so he went there. He knocked on the door, and when Rick opened it, ready to throw another punch, Charlie says he responded with a kick that ended the confrontation almost instantly. That's one incident, but it wasn't the last time Charlie had to deal with Rick's behavior. And the second story is somehow even more chaotic. This time, the location was Eddie Murphy's own house. According to Charlie, Rick showed up, made himself very comfortable on the couch, and then did something almost unbelievable. He got mud all over the furniture, seemingly without a care in the world, and told them to just buy a new one when Charlie objected. Now, if you were standing in that room, watching someone destroy furniture in your brother's house and brush it off like it was nothing, what would you have done? Because, according to Charlie and the people who witnessed it, they didn't hesitate. They restrained him and delivered a beating focused entirely on his legs, described as a level of physical punishment that would leave most people unable to function. And Rick's reaction? According to the story, even after all of that, he still had jokes, brushing off the ordeal like he'd stayed in worse places. Here's what makes this story so much more believable than it has any right to be. Charlie Murphy wasn't just a tough guy talking a big game. He had actual, verified training. He was a lifelong martial arts enthusiast who took his training seriously for decades. So when you hear him describe handling Rick James or anyone else with that level of physical control, you start to realize this wasn't exaggeration for comedic effect. This was a man who genuinely had the skill set to back up every word. And that brings us to a side of Charlie Murphy that almost nobody talks about. Because it turns out his martial arts background wasn't just a fun detail in his biography. It followed him through his entire career. And it led to one of the most jaw-dropping stories ever told about him, by comedians who had absolutely no reason to make it up. The hidden fighter nobody saw coming. Ask yourself this: how many comedians do you know who could legitimately handle themselves in a real fight? Not talk about it, not joke about it, actually do it under real pressure against real opponents? According to multiple comedians who spent real time around him, Charlie Murphy could. Bill Burr has told a story from a tour stop that perfectly captures this. According to Burr, there was a kid working at the venue who was also into martial arts, and who apparently believed his style was better than Charlie's. Charlie disagreed, and the two of them ended up sparring right there. Burr describes watching Charlie dominate the exchange so completely that Charlie wasn't even looking at his opponent anymore. He was looking over at Burr, smiling the entire time, while the other guy got outclassed in real time. Now here's a moment of tension for you. Burr admits that after watching that fight, he felt embarrassed for the kid, but he also admits something else. He was relieved he'd never had to test himself against Charlie, because based on what he'd just seen, he knew exactly how that would go. But that's not even the craziest martial arts story connected to Charlie, because according to both Joe Rogan and comedian Donald Dion Cole, sources who separately confirmed the same account, Charlie once showed them actual footage of himself in a real martial arts competition. And in that footage, according to what they describe, Charlie knocked out an opponent who couldn't have been older than 14. When they questioned him about it afterward, half joking, half stunned, Charlie's response was simple: anybody stepping into that ring knew what they signed up for. Sit with that for a second. This is a man who was simultaneously one of the funniest storytellers in comedy and, according to multiple credible witnesses, a legitimately dangerous fighter. That combination almost never happens. Usually you get one or the other, the tough guy or the funny guy. Charlie Murphy was both at the same time, and most people had no idea. But here's where the story takes its most unexpected turn yet, because even a fighter as accomplished as Charlie Murphy eventually got humbled, and the person who witnessed it was none other than Kevin Hart. According to Kevin Hart, this all went down at Charlie's own house in New Jersey. The conversation turned to martial arts, and when Charlie brought it up, the room reacted the way you'd expect, with disbelief. Nobody in that room, according to Hart, actually believed Charlie trained seriously, so somebody, a friend they called Smokey, challenged him on it directly. Charlie's response wasn't to argue, it was to prove it. He told them he had a tape, an actual VHS tape, of a real match he'd been in. And according to Hart, everyone in that room, expecting to watch Charlie dominate the way Bill Burr had described, instead watched something completely different unfold on screen. In the footage, Charlie takes a kick to the stomach so hard and so unexpected that even he, watching it back years later with a room full of comedians, reacted like he was seeing it for the first time. According to Hart, the room lost it, not because Charlie looked weak, but because of just how brutally, undeniably real that moment on the tape was. Here's the thing that makes this story so powerful though. Charlie didn't have to show them that tape. He could have just told the story about beating the 14-year-old and left it there, protecting the legend. Instead, he chose to show the moment where he got hit hard, because that's who he was. He wasn't interested in only telling the stories that made him look good. He told the truth, even when the truth was him getting kicked in the stomach on camera in front of his peers. That kind of honesty is rare in Hollywood. And it's part of why, when Charlie passed away, the way people talked about him was so different from what you'd expect. The storyteller who could make anything funny. Before we get to how it all ended, there's one more piece of the puzzle you need, because it explains why every single story in this video hit the way it did. Charlie Murphy wasn't just someone things happened to. He was, according to nearly everyone who ever shared a stage or a green room with him, one of the single greatest storytellers to ever come out of Hollywood. Think about that phrase for a second. Greatest storyteller. That's a specific, hard-earned title in comedy. Anybody can be funny for 30 seconds. Very few people can take a completely mundane moment, something as boring as walking into a convenience store, and turn it into a bit that has an entire room in tears. Charlie could do exactly that. Here's a perfect example. By his own account, he once walked into a 7-Eleven for something as simple as rolling papers. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that sounds like the setup to a legendary bit. But according to Charlie, the clerk working the counter refused to sell them to him, citing store policy on drug paraphernalia. And Charlie, without missing a beat, pointed out everything else on those shelves that arguably raised a lot more eyebrows. Alcohol, condoms, enhancement pills, and needled the clerk about the double standard the whole way through. That's the gift. Most people would have just left the store annoyed. Charlie turned it into a 3-minute comedy routine that had crowds losing their minds. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because not every story Charlie told started out funny. Some of them started as genuine tragedy, and he still found a way to bring an audience along with him, laughing, without ever losing the weight of what actually happened. Charlie's father died when he was young, under circumstances that most people would never bring up in a comedy set, let alone build a bit around. According to Charlie, his father was killed by a woman, the result of what he described, plainly, as a romantic dispute. Now, on paper, there is nothing funny about that sentence, absolutely nothing. But listen to how Charlie framed it when he told the story publicly. He leaned into the irony of it, the almost unbelievable familiarity of a story that, as he put it, was practically as old as storytelling itself. He'd tell his own kids, half joking, that if a woman looks upset with you, you'd better keep your eyes open. That's an extraordinary skill. Taking real personal loss and finding a way to talk about it honestly, without minimizing it, while still making an audience feel like they could laugh with him rather than feel uncomfortable for him. That's not something you can teach. That's raw talent, sharpened by a life that gave him plenty of material to work with, whether he wanted it or not. And it wasn't just strangers in comedy clubs who noticed this about him. Charlie built a reputation for being fiercely protective of the people he cared about, especially fellow comedians who were vulnerable in the middle of a performance. There's a well-known account from a live taping where an audience member shouted something disrespectful at a comedian mid-set. According to those who were there, Charlie didn't hesitate for a second. He was on his feet immediately, ready to confront the situation directly, because that's simply who he was. Loyalty first, always. Even the strangest interactions Charlie had with fans reveal something about the impact he had. According to Charlie, he was once approached by a man who openly admitted to holding deeply prejudiced views, who nonetheless told Charlie that watching him and his castmates on Chappelle's show had genuinely shifted how he thought about people every single week. Now, whether you find that story unsettling, funny, bizarre, or all three at once, it says something powerful about the reach Charlie's storytelling had. He wasn't just making people laugh. In some strange, roundabout way, he was actually changing how people saw the world around them, one Wednesday night sketch at a time. So here's something worth thinking about before we move into the final chapter of this story. How many entertainers do you know who could take a story about losing a parent, a random encounter with a stranger holding ugly views, and an argument over rolling papers, and turn all three into moments that people still talk about, years and years later? That's not luck. That's mastery of a craft that very few people ever truly achieve. And that mastery is exactly why, when Charlie Murphy's story finally came to an end, the entertainment industry didn't just mourn a comedian. They mourned a legend. What happened when Charlie Murphy died? Charlie Murphy passed away in 2017. And if you want to understand who he really was, not the sketches, not the persona, but the actual man, you need to hear how the people who knew him best talked about him after he was gone. Here's the detail that stands out more than any other. For years, Charlie Murphy lived and worked in an industry where he could have easily been permanently defined by one single fact: that his younger brother was one of the most famous entertainers alive. That's a hard shadow to escape. plenty of people in that position never manage to step out of it. They spend entire careers being introduced as the brother of, never quite shaking the comparison, never quite getting the credit for what they built themselves. It becomes a ceiling, a permanent asterisk next to their name, no matter how hard they work or how much talent they actually have. But according to those closest to him, when Charlie passed away, that's not what the headline said. Nobody said Eddie Murphy's brother had died. They said Charlie Murphy had died. He had built an identity so distinct, so unmistakably his own, that even in the moment of his passing, he was remembered as exactly who he was, not as an extension of someone else's fame. Think about how much work that takes. Think about how many years of grinding through comedy clubs, telling stories nobody had heard, yet proving himself night after night. It takes to build a name that stands completely on its own, next to a brother as famous as Eddie Murphy. And the way his funeral was described only reinforces that. People who attended have called it the kind of send-off reserved for genuine legends, the kind of gathering where you could physically feel, how much this man meant to the people around him. Those who were there describe it as an honor just to be present, a farewell that matched the size of the life he'd actually lived, not just the size of the character people saw on screen. And even now, years later, comedians who worked alongside him still talk about him with a specific kind of respect, not just as someone who was funny, but as someone who looked out for the people around him. He's been described as a mentor, someone who gave real advice to younger comedians finding their way, someone whose presence in a room made things better, and whose absence is still felt by the people who knew him. So here's a question worth sitting with. In an industry built on reinvention, exaggeration, and constant self-promotion, how many people actually manage to become remembered for exactly who they were? No more, no less. Charlie Murphy did. So let's bring it back to where we started. A man who got run off a basketball court by Prince in church shoes. A man who fought a music legend not once, but twice, and lived to turn it into comedy gold. A man with real, verified fighting skill, who was humble enough to show the world the moment he got knocked down, instead of only the moments he won. That's not a character. That's not a bit written by a Chappelle show writer's room. That's a real man, who lived a life stranger and more entertaining than most fiction, and who happened to be generous enough to share it with the rest of us. Now here's what I want to know from you. Out of everything in this video, the basketball game, the Rick James stories, the martial arts footage, which one shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments, because I guarantee you, everyone's answer is going to be different. And if this video gave you a new appreciation for Charlie Murphy, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, because we've got a lot more untold Hollywood stories coming, and you do not want to miss the next one. Charlie Murphy, gone too soon, but never ever forgotten. Want me to tighten or expand a different section? Instead, the outro, for instance, could take an extra beat before the subscribe ask?